Welcome to Unsolved Archives, where real stories of mystery, disappearance, and the unexplained are told in calm, haunting detail. Here, every case is true, every voice once lived, and every silence still echoes through time. Tonight's story is one of those echoes, a chapter lost to history, waiting to be heard again. Settle in, turn down the lights, and let the mystery begin. In the summer of 1587, more than 100 men, women, and children landed on the coast of what is now North Carolina. They were English settlers, sent by Sir Walter Raleigh under the blessing of Queen Elizabeth I. Their mission was to build a permanent colony, the first foothold of England in the New World. The place they chose was Roanoke Island, a stretch of sand and forest between the Atlantic Ocean and the mainland. It was small, isolated, and surrounded by shallow inlets. But it seemed defensible, and its soil was fertile enough to grow crops. The settlers built simple wooden houses, dug wells, and raised a palisade for protection. Among them was John White, an artist and explorer who had already been to America before. He came as governor of the colony. His daughter, Eleanor Dare, was pregnant when they arrived. Weeks later, she gave birth to a girl, Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World. At first, life on Roanoke followed the rhythm of hope. The settlers traded with nearby indigenous tribes, mostly the Croatan, who lived on a neighboring island. But the relationships were fragile. Other tribes remembered violence from earlier expeditions. Supplies ran low faster than expected, and storms destroyed parts of the settlement. By autumn, the colonists realized they could not survive the winter without help. They urged John White to return to England for more provisions. He was reluctant to leave his family, but finally agreed. He promised to come back within months. In England, however, the world had changed. War with Spain consumed the kingdom. The Spanish Armada threatened invasion. Every ship was seized for defense. White could not find passage back to America. It took him 3 years to return. When he finally reached Roanoke in 1590, the island was silent. From the ship, the settlement looked empty. No smoke, no movement, only the outline of the fort against the trees. White's heart sank as he stepped ashore. The palisade stood, but the houses were gone. The ground was overgrown with grass. Inside the fort, he found no bones, no bodies, no weapons. There was no sign of battle or fire. Everything was simply gone. The only clue was carved into a post at the entrance, the word Croton. Another carving on a nearby tree showed just 3 letters, Zero. White had given instructions before leaving that if the colonists ever moved, they should carve the name of their destination somewhere visible, and if they were in danger, they should add a cross beside it. There was no cross. To White, that meant they had moved peacefully, likely to Croton Island, home of their allies. But a storm was rising. His ship's crew refused to go farther. They turned back to England before reaching the island. John White never saw the settlers again. No wreckage, no graves, no trace of 115 people was ever found. The lost colony of Roanoke entered history as one of the earliest and greatest mysteries of the New World. To understand the mystery of Roanoke, it helps to know that the island had already seen failure before the settlers of 1587 ever arrived. It was not the first English attempt to build a colony in the New World. It was the third. In 1584, Sir Walter Raleigh received a charter from Queen Elizabeth to establish an English presence in America. The mission was bold and expensive. England was a small kingdom challenging the power of Spain, whose empire stretched across the seas. A base in North America would allow England to raid Spanish ships, expand trade, and plant its flag on new land. Raleigh's first expedition that year reached the coast of what the English called Virginia, a name given in honor of the Virgin Queen. They explored the region, made contact with the local tribes, and returned to England with glowing reports. They spoke of fertile soil, gentle climate, and abundant wildlife. Raleigh's investors were impressed. Plans began for a permanent settlement. The second expedition, in 1585, carried 100 men under Ralph Lane. They chose Roanoke Island as their base, partly for its sheltered location between the mainland and the Outer Banks. At first, the project looked promising. They built fortifications, mapped the coastline, and sent expeditions inland. But within a year, their situation collapsed. The settlers depended on trade with local indigenous groups for food. Tensions rose quickly. A series of misunderstandings and acts of violence destroyed the fragile peace. In one clash, Lane's men killed the local chief Wingina, breaking all trust. When a resupply ship finally arrived, the colonists abandoned Roanoke and returned to England. When John White arrived 2 years later with his group of families, he already knew of those earlier failures. Roanoke was not his first choice. His plan was to settle farther north, near Chesapeake Bay, where soil and water were better. But storms and navigation errors forced them to stop at Roanoke once again. The ship's captain refused to go farther. They unloaded there, tired and short of supplies. This meant they were starting on a site with a history of conflict. Some of the local tribes were still angry about the earlier killings. White tried to repair relations, sending gifts and peaceful messages. The Croatan people from a nearby island responded with friendship. They offered food and helped the settlers build houses. Others remained hostile and kept their distance. Raleigh's charter required the colony to be self-sustaining, but it was far from ready. Supplies were low, tools scarce, and the soil not as fertile as promised. They arrived too late in the season to plant new crops. Their only hope was to survive until the next harvest or until ships returned from England. By autumn, tension grew. Some wanted to relocate immediately. Others believed they could endure. When White finally agreed to sail home for more provisions, the group was already divided by exhaustion and fear. He left behind his daughter, his newborn granddaughter, and more than 100 souls who looked to the horizon each day for sails that never came. For the English back home, the Roanoke colony was more than a settlement. It was a statement, proof that England could match Spain's empire. Its failure would not only cost lives, but national pride. Raleigh himself poured money into the effort, but war intervened. Every ship was needed to fight the Armada. The colony was forgotten in the noise of history until White's desperate return 3 years later. What he found, or rather, what he didn't, would echo far beyond the age of exploration. When John White finally set sail back to Roanoke, it was not out of choice but persistence. 3 long years had passed since he left his family on the island. England had been at war. The Spanish Armada had consumed every ship and every sailor. By the time peace allowed voyages again, most believed the colony was already lost. In 1590, Raleigh arranged a relief mission. Not a full resettlement, just a small expedition to check what remained. White joined them, anxious and older, carrying with him a hope that his daughter and granddaughter were still alive. The voyage across the Atlantic was slow and difficult. 2 supply ships, the Hopewell and the Moonlight, fought storms and leaks. Their food dwindled. White wrote in his journal that he prayed each night for calm seas. By August, they reached the Carolina coast. As they approached Roanoke Island, they looked for signs of life. Smoke from campfires, flags, any signal. There was none. The shoreline was silent. The fort's outline was faint under thick grass. They dropped anchor and sent a small boat to shore. White led the landing party himself. He was eager but fearful. The last time he had seen this place, it was full of laughter and hammering, the sounds of people building a home. Now, there was only the sea wind and the rustle of reeds. At the edge of the settlement stood a tall post. On it was carved a single word, Croton. The letters were deep, as if cut slowly and carefully. Near the entrance gate, another carving read, "Only Zero." White remembered his agreement with the colonists. If they moved, they were to carve the name of their new location. If danger forced them, they were to add a cross above it. There was no cross. To him, that meant they had left willingly, perhaps to join their allies on Croton Island, about 50 miles south. He searched the site for other clues. The houses had been dismantled, not destroyed. No weapons, no armor, no personal belongings. It looked like an organized departure. Barrels and chests were buried neatly, suggesting they had planned to return. There are no signs of battle, no bones, no graves. The fort's palisade was still intact. Trees had grown thick around the clearing. Inside, they found rusted tools, fragments of pottery, and a few trunks buried in the sand. One contained maps and papers ruined by rain. Another held iron tools covered in rust. The ship's crew urged White to leave quickly. A storm was forming offshore. They feared their anchors would not hold. White pleaded for time, insisting they must sail south to Croton. But heavy winds pushed the ships toward open sea. After days of struggle, they were forced to abandon the search and turn back to England. For the rest of his life, John White carried the weight of that retreat. In letters to Raleigh, he wrote that he believed the colonists were alive among the Croatan people. He never saw them again. In England, his story spread like a ghost across the empire. 115 settlers, men, women, and children, had vanished without trace. No fire, no wreckage, no blood. Only a word carved into wood. The word itself became a symbol, Croton. It echoed through the following centuries as a riddle. Had they joined the tribe? Had they fled inland? Had they perished at sea? Or had something else taken them? The mystery began not with violence, but with absence. An entire community erased so cleanly that only the name of another place remained. After John White's return to England, the Roanoke colony passed from a living project into a question. Raleigh wanted answers, but war, debt, and politics made new voyages nearly impossible. The Queen's attention had shifted to Europe, and investors were tired of loss. America was far away, expensive, and dangerous. White's reports described no massacre, no sign of violence, just an empty fort and the word Croton. Yet even this small hope was not enough to move the crown. Raleigh, still determined to protect his charter, promised another expedition. It never came. In the years that followed, Roanoke faded from the official record. Ships came and went along the Atlantic coast, but none stopped to search in detail. Storms, pirates, and the threat of Spanish warships kept most captains away from the shallow Carolina Sounds. The island became a name on maps, a place known but never visited. When the English finally returned to North America in 1607, 20 years had passed. The colony of Jamestown, farther north, was founded by men who knew the story of Roanoke and feared repeating. Some of them carried instructions to look for survivors. In 1611, Captain John Smith heard from Powhatan, the powerful chief who ruled much of the region. Powhatan claimed he had destroyed a group of settlers living near the Chesapeake, killing them after they built houses without his permission. Smith wondered if these could have been the Roanoke colonists, but no evidence was ever found. Later accounts told of Europeans living among native tribes. Traders and explorers reported seeing fair-skinned children, people who spoke fragments of English or wore European-style clothing. Each rumor reignited belief that the lost colony had not died, but merged with the land. Yet no one could confirm it. The records are inconsistent, the geography uncertain. Some explorers claimed to find carved letters or strange ruins inland, only to lose their way. Others admitted fabricating stories to gain favor with sponsors. By 1620, the English settlements had moved on. New colonies thrived in Virginia and Massachusetts. Roanoke was an old failure, a warning from another generation. But the mystery refused to vanish. Sailors spoke of ghost fires seen on the island's shores. Travelers told tales of voices in the fog, calling in English accents. Historians later noted that no bones or graves were ever uncovered. The settlers had not been buried on the island. No evidence of fire or destruction existed. The disappearance was total. For some, that was the most haunting detail of all. War or disease leaves remains. Storms scattered debris, but Roanoke left nothing. It was as if the land itself had swallowed them whole. In England, John White's journal became the primary source. His drawings and maps were studied by later explorers. Scholars searched them for hidden messages, secret codes, or markings that might hint at the colonists' fate. None were found. White died believing his family had survived. In his final letters, he wrote that they might yet live among the friendly nation of Croton. No one ever proved him wrong or right. The silence that followed was the colony's longest legacy. It stretched across the ocean and through time, filling every absence with imagination. When later generations looked west, they did so knowing that the first English colony in America had vanished into the trees without a sound. The mystery of Roanoke did not end with silence. It evolved through speculation, growing into one of the most studied enigmas of early colonial history. Over the centuries, historians, explorers, and archaeologists have proposed many explanations. Some are rational, others drift toward myth. The first and most enduring theory is that the settlers moved south to Croton Island, now known as Hatteras. The clue carved into the post, Croton, points directly to it. The Croatan people were allies of the English. They had traded food and helped the earlier expedition survive. It would have made sense for the colonists to seek safety with them. Archaeological evidence gives this theory weight. Excavations on Hatteras have uncovered pieces of 16th century English artifacts, fragments of swords, pottery, and tools. Some belong to the correct period. These could have come from the Roanoke settlers or from later trade, but their presence keeps the theory alive. If the colonists reached Croton, they might have merged with the tribe, adopting their customs and language. Over time, their descendants could have blended completely into the native population. This would explain why later explorers claimed to see indigenous people with gray eyes or light hair, details that sounded remarkable to European witnesses. A second theory suggests that the settlers left Roanoke but failed to reach Croton. They may have tried to sail north toward Chesapeake Bay, their original destination. With limited boats and little experience, a storm could have wrecked them in the shallow waters of the Outer Banks. Shifting sandbars, sudden squalls, and strong currents make that stretch of coast among the most dangerous in the world. If their small craft sank, everything could have vanished beneath the waves, leaving no trace. Another idea is that they moved inland, seeking better farmland or safety from raids. Several reports from early explorers mention Europeans living among tribes along the Chowan and Neuse rivers, far from the coast. One such report from the early 1600s described a group of English clothed in the manner of the savages. Yet no remains or documents confirm these encounters. The darker theories involve violence. Some believe the colonists were killed by hostile tribes angered by the earlier English expeditions. Others think they might have fallen victim to starvation or disease and been buried in unmarked graves. Still others point to Powhatan's later claim that he destroyed a group of settlers near the Chesapeake. There is even a theory of betrayal, that some of the colonists turned against the rest, dividing into factions and perishing separately. Frontier survival required unity, and any fracture could be fatal. In the 19th century, more romantic versions emerged. Writers claimed the colonists joined a lost white tribe, wandering the wilderness or living in secret settlements. One legend spoke of Virginia Dare, the newborn child, growing into a spirit who roamed the forests as a white doe, watching over the land that took her family. Modern science has tried to separate fact from story. DNA research aims to trace potential descendants among local tribes, such as the Lumbee and Hatteras Indians. Linguistic studies have found faint traces of English words in regional dialects, though none are conclusive. Each theory holds fragments of truth. Migration, assimilation, or death all could have happened in some combination. The only certainty is that the settlers did not simply vanish in the thin air. They went somewhere, leaving a single word to mark their path. But where that path ended remains unknown. The forest, the ocean, and the centuries that followed have erased almost everything, except the questions. For centuries, Roanoke remained more myth than science. Maps were redrawn, theories debated, and still no physical proof appeared. That began to change in the late 20th century, when archaeologists started digging not for ghosts, but for traces of human life, pottery, tools, nails, anything that could place the colonists in a new location. The earliest serious excavations took place on Roanoke Island itself. Teams searched for evidence of a massacre, a graveyard, or burned structures. They found none. Instead, they uncovered items from the original 1585 military expedition. Gun flints, copper fragments, and armor pieces, but nothing that belonged to the 1587 settlers. The site confirmed one thing only. The later colony had been built on the same ground as the failed one before it. Attention then shifted south to Hatteras Island, known in the 16th century as Croton. In the early 1990s, archaeologists found fragments of English pottery, a sword hilt, and a small brass buckle. The artifacts matched the period of Raleigh's colonies. Their distribution suggested that English material had been used for generations, traded or repurposed by local tribes. A later project, known as the Hatteras Archaeology Project, examined the remains of native settlements in the same area. They found that indigenous artifacts from the late 1500s were mixed with European ones: glass beads, copper rings, and iron tools. The mixture hinted at long-term contact between English and native people. It did not prove the settlers survived, but it proved connection. Meanwhile, another discovery appeared inland. In the 2010s, a researcher studying a faded 16th century map drawn by John White noticed a small patch covering a symbol near the mouth of the Chowan River. When the patch was removed using infrared imaging, a hidden fort symbol was revealed underneath. Historians called it Site X. Excavations at Site X began soon after. Archaeologists found fragments of Elizabethan ceramics and parts of iron tools buried near an old native village. The items were few, nothing like a full settlement, but they belonged unmistakably to the same period as Roanoke. This discovery suggested that some colonists may have moved inland, splitting from the main group. Perhaps a smaller party went toward the mainland, while others sailed south to Croton. It fit the idea of a colony divided. By need, not disaster. But the evidence remained frustratingly incomplete. Critics argued that trade could explain the artifacts. English goods often move hundreds of kilometers through native trade networks. A potsherd or a nail did not necessarily mean English people lived there. In Hatteras, the same problem persisted. Some items clearly belonged to Europeans, but they could have been gifts from sailors, wreckage from passing ships, or remnants of later contact. None bore markings that linked them directly to the lost colony. Still, the findings changed the tone of the debate. The colonists were no longer imagined as ghosts swallowed by the forest. They had left traces, faint but real. The question was not whether they survived for a time, but where and for how long. Excavations continue today, often quietly, funded by small grants and local museums. Every year, new shards appear, each one analyzed and debated. Each could be a clue or another echo of later contact. The land itself has become part of the mystery. Erosion, hurricanes, and centuries of settlement have reshaped the Carolina coast. Much of Roanoke Island has shifted, its old shoreline buried under meters of sand. It is entirely possible that any remains of the colony lie deep beneath water or mud beyond reach. What the archaeologists have found so far tells a modest but powerful story, not of disappearance, but of transformation. A colony that began as English ended as something else, absorbed into the landscape of a new world that refused to give it back. Long before archaeology tried to unearth the lost colony, the mystery lived in ink, in letters, maps, and a single carved word that became its haunting signature. Croton was more than a clue. It became a symbol, a whisper left on wood that spoke across centuries. When John White first saw the word carved into the post in 1590, he believed it was a sign of survival. Croton Island, home of the Croatan people, was a familiar place. The settlers had friends there. White's own notes suggest he took the word as reassurance, not despair. It meant they had moved intentionally, but later generations gave the word new meanings. To the English public, Croton became an echo of loss. The mystery transformed it from geography into omen. The name appeared in plays, poems, and legends. It was even rumored, centuries later, to appear in other strange contexts, carved into posts at scenes of disappearance, written in journals of sailors lost at sea. None of these stories are verified, but the myth of the word grew until it took on a life of its own. In White's own writings, Croton appeared several times before the colony vanished. He had used it to describe a friendly people skilled in fishing and trade. Their leader, Manteo, had traveled to England years earlier and returned as an ally. When the settlers arrived in 1587, Manteo acted as their interpreter and guide. He was baptized there and named Lord of Roanoke and Dasamungalpook by English decree. Some historians believe that the colonists followed Manteo back to his homeland after White's departure. The island was fertile, the tribe friendly, and the distance short enough to travel by small boat. If the word carved on the post pointed to him, it could have been both message and farewell, a way of saying we are safe. Beyond that word, only fragments of written evidence remain. White's maps, preserved in the British Museum, contain subtle markings, faint crosses and erased symbols that have fueled debate for decades. One hidden mark, revealed by modern imaging, suggests a small fort inland, perhaps a fallback position planned by the settlers in case of trouble. Letters from Raleigh's associates mention the colony only briefly after its loss. Some reference rumors of survivors, others urge further search. But interest faded as money and politics shifted. By the time Jamestown was founded 20 years later, the mystery had hardened into legend. The language of the local tribes offers its own trace. Croton itself likely comes from Algonquian roots, crow referring to a council or town, and tone to talk or speak. Roughly translated, it may have meant place of council or talking town. If so, the carving could have been literal, pointing to a known settlement rather than something mystical. Yet, even with translation, the message remains incomplete. The word was there, carved deep and deliberate, but no one ever reached the place it described. A storm drove White away, and no later expedition confirmed its meaning. Over time, historians found that nearly every document about Roanoke contained contradictions. Dates shifted, names changed spelling. Reports written years apart used different terms for the same tribes. It was as if the story itself refused to stay fixed. Today, Croton endures as the one solid fragment in a sea of uncertainty. It stands between fact and folklore, a word that once meant safety and now means loss. If John White had arrived 1 week earlier, the word might have led him to his family. But the sea closed, the storm rose, and a message became history's unsolved line, carved into wood, left to weather, and carried forward by the wind. Over the centuries, the lost colony of Roanoke escaped the pages of history and entered the realm of legend. Its bare facts, an abandoned fort, a vanished community, a single word carved into wood, became a canvas for every generation's fears and fascinations. In the 17th century, colonial writers saw the story as divine punishment or moral lesson. To them, the settlers had failed because they defied providence, settling a land before God had ordained it. Sermons compared their fate to biblical wanderers lost in the wilderness. By the 18th century, the tone shifted. The Age of Enlightenment transformed Roanoke into a mystery of reason, a problem to be solved by logic and evidence. Maps were redrawn, old letters studied, and historians searched for lost documents in dusty English archives. But no discovery came, and so the absence itself began to feed imagination again. In the 19th century, American Romanticism turned the lost colony into a myth of origins. Poets and novelists imagined the colonists merging peacefully with native tribes, their descendants surviving unseen in the forests. The legend of Virginia Dare, the baby born at Roanoke, grew from fact into folklore. One tale claimed she was transformed into a white doe by an old spirit after refusing the love of a native shaman. Hunters said her ghost still wandered the woods, her eyes as pale as moonlight. Other storytellers preferred darker endings. Some wrote of ghosts haunting Roanoke Island, the voices of settlers calling from beneath the waves, or phantom ships seen offshore on stormy nights. Fishermen swore the sea near the island carried a strange echo, like faint cries carried by the wind. By the early 20th century, crotone had become a word of superstition. Writers claimed it appeared mysteriously in other tales of disappearance. In one story, it was found carved into a post in an abandoned village in Virginia. In another, the word was scribbled in the diary of a sailor who vanished at sea. Edgar Allan Poe's last delirious whisper was even said to be crotone, a myth repeated so often it was eventually printed as fact. None of these stories can be proven, but they keep the word alive. Modern times brought Roanoke into popular culture. Television, novels, and films reimagined the colonists as victims of everything from alien abduction to supernatural curses. The simplicity of the mystery made it adaptable to any fear. Each retelling replaced the unknown with a new explanation that reflected its era. Scientific in the Enlightenment, spiritual in the 19th century, and paranormal in the 20th. Yet beneath all these versions lies the same silence. No matter how many times the story is told, no one can fill the empty space where the colonists once stood. Historians often point out that myths grow where evidence ends. Roanoke's perfect absence left endless room for invention. The missing people became symbols of hope, loss, and the danger of human ambition. For the people of the Outer Banks, the legend became part of local identity. Towns built theaters to reenact the colony's last days. Actors played John White, Eleanor Dare, and the Croatan chief Manteo beneath open skies as waves rolled in behind them. Visitors still come each summer to watch the story retold, a cycle of arrival, struggle, disappearance, and wonder. The real colonists may be gone, but their shadows remain woven into the landscape, in the dunes, the pine forests, and the names carved on maps. Every legend retold keeps them alive, suspended between history and myth. And somewhere between fact and fiction, the silence of Roanoke continues to speak louder than any answer. In the 20th and 21st centuries, technology gave historians new tools to hunt old ghosts. For Roanoke, That meant radar, satellite imaging, DNA analysis, and a level of precision that John White could never have imagined. Yet the outcome remained eerily the same. More data, no certainty. The first systematic archaeological surveys began in the 1940s. The U.S. Park Service excavated parts of Roanoke Island, mapping the original settlement and uncovering remains of the earlier 1585 fort. They found traces of workshops, wells, and English tools, but no graves, no signs of mass death, and no remains of the later colonists. The fort itself was a reconstruction built over an older foundation whose original outline had already been eroded by storms. By the 1980s, the focus had shifted south to Hatteras Island, once Croton. Teams discovered European artifacts mixed with native material, copper rings, iron tools, and fragments of Elizabethan pottery. Carbon dating placed them in the correct century. For a time, optimism returned. Perhaps the settlers had lived there, at least for a while. In the early 2000s, ground-penetrating radar revealed more possible structures under Hatteras sand. But the evidence was faint, disrupted by centuries of hurricanes. Layers of soil have been washed away and redeposited again and again. What was once clear ground was now meters below modern dunes. The most promising lead came from the 16th century map drawn by John White himself, now kept in the British Museum. In 2012, researchers noticed that part of the map surface had been covered with a small patch. Using infrared light, they discovered a hidden drawing beneath, a red symbol of a fort located far inland, near the confluence of the Chowan and Roanoke rivers. The site became known as Site X. Excavations there uncovered shards of English pottery, fragments of weapons, and copper pieces that could have come from the lost colony. The items were few but authentic, and they matched the correct period. Still, they proved only that English goods had reached that area, not necessarily the settlers themselves. Trade between natives and Europeans was common, and objects could travel far from their original owners. In 2015, another dig uncovered European items as second location several miles away, site-wide, raising the possibility that the colony had split into groups, one heading inland, another south. It was plausible. Survival would have depended on mobility, but no clear settlement foundations or burial grounds have ever been found. DNA studies offered another angle. Geneticists attempted to trace descendants of the colonists among local tribes, particularly the Lumbee and Hatteras peoples. Oral histories in both groups mention ancestors who were white or English-speaking. Some family names resemble those of the Roanoke settlers, but genetic evidence is inconclusive. Centuries of intermarriage make it nearly impossible to isolate 16th century English markers from later admixture. Linguistic analysis has produced similar results. A handful of words in the Carolina Algonquian dialect show resemblance to Elizabethan English, words for metal, for house, for writing. But these may have entered through traders or missionaries decades later. The modern era also brought radar scans, satellite imagery, and coastal modeling. Using simulations, geographers concluded that large portions of Roanoke Island have since been lost to erosion. The sea has claimed over half a kilometer of shoreline since 1600. It is entirely possible that whatever evidence existed now lies underwater. Today, the leading theories remain divided between migration and assimilation. Archaeologists speak cautiously, avoiding the word disappearance. Instead, they describe transformation, an English colony that became part of native one, leaving only fragments behind. Every expedition uncovers something new, yet none has closed the case. The mystery resists resolution, as if the past itself refuses to give up the truth. In the end, the search for Roanoke has become less about discovery and more about endurance. A centuries-long conversation between the living and the lost. More than 4 centuries have passed since the people of Roanoke vanished, yet their story still holds a unique place in the imagination of the world. It endures not because of what we know, but because of what we never found. For historians, Roanoke stands as a cautionary tale about ambition, distance, and the limits of empire. England's dream of a permanent New World foothold began there and failed there. The lessons learned about supply, diplomacy, and survival shaped every colony that followed. Without Roanoke's disappearance, Jamestown might never have succeeded. Failure, in this case, was foundation. For archaeologists, the colony is a puzzle that resists closure. The sand and water of the Outer Banks hide their answers well. Each storm reshapes the shoreline, erasing evidence and rewriting the past. The mystery has become a measure of patience, a reminder that some questions outlive the people who ask them. Culturally, Roanoke became something greater than its facts. It symbolizes the tension between discovery and disappearance, between the known world and the wilderness beyond. It is the story of human hope colliding with nature's silence. Writers, filmmakers, and artists continue to reinvent it. From early plays performed on the shores of North Carolina to modern television series, the lost colony returns again and again as metaphor. Sometimes it represents innocence swallowed by the unknown. Sometimes it speaks of cultural fusion, 2 worlds meeting, neither surviving unchanged. And sometimes it is pure horror, a blank space that demands the imagination to fill it. In local memory, the story lives on more gently. On Roanoke Island, visitors walk through reconstructed forts and gardens. They see the outlines of cabins, the tools, and the wells. Each summer, actors perform The Lost Colony, an outdoor drama that has been staged for nearly a century. As night falls, the stage glows under the same stars that watched the settlers arrive. The descendants of nearby tribes still tell their own versions. In those stories, the settlers did not vanish. They joined the people of the land, took new names, learned new languages, and left the old world behind. Some families in the Carolinas still trace ancestry to both English and native roots. Whether or not those lines are literal, they hold symbolic truth. The colony may not have been lost, but transformed. For others, Roanoke is an emblem of mystery itself, the unsolved that refuses to rest. It reminds us that history is written not only in what survives, but in what disappears. The silence of Roanoke is not empty. It is full of echoes. When visitors stand at the edge of the island today, the wind carries the sound of waves breaking where the first English houses once stood. The sea has taken much of it, but the story remains. A single word carved into wood, croton, became its monument. A word that once promised safety now stands for uncertainty. Perhaps the colonists did not vanish into oblivion. Perhaps they simply stepped into another world, one beyond maps, beyond records, beyond recovery. In the end, Roanoke endures because it offers no ending. It is a question written across 4 centuries of history. And like all great mysteries, it survives by never being answered. On August 20th, 1966, a boy climbing a hill in Brazil made a discovery that would puzzle investigators for decades. The hill was called Morro do Vento, a quiet rise near the city of Niterói, across the bay from Rio de Janeiro. It was a place of scrub, stone, and heat, not the kind of place where mysteries begin. As the boy made his way through the grass, he noticed something strange. 2 figures lay on the ground, side by side. They were dressed in neat suits, as if for a meeting. Over their faces were thick lead masks, the kind used to block radiation. At first, he thought they were asleep, but when police arrived, it was clear the men were dead. Their bodies were stretched out on their backs, their hands resting by their sides. No struggle, no wounds, no blood. Around them lay a notebook, a pair of sunglasses, and an empty bottle of water. Nearby, investigators found a small packet with towels and 2 receipts from a nearby bar. The lead masks were crude, cut by hand, shaped to fit over the eyes and part of the face. Each had no openings, no way to see through them. They seemed more like shields than disguises. When officers searched the pockets, they found a small note written in Portuguese. It said, 1630B at the specified place. 1830 ingest capsules. After effect protect metals await signal mask. It made no sense. The men were identified as Manuel Pereira and Miguel Viana, both electronics technicians from a nearby town. They had told their families they were going to buy materials for work. Instead, they had traveled to Rio, bought matching suits, and gone up the hill. No signs of violence were found. No poison was detected in their organs. There was no evidence of robbery. Their money, watches, and jewelry remained untouched. What was certain was that they had climbed the hill voluntarily. They had eaten before. Traces of food were found in their stomachs. The empty bottle suggested they had washed down something, perhaps tablets, perhaps not. The official report listed the cause of death as undetermined. The newspapers called it O Misterio das Mascaras de Chumbo, the lead mask's mystery. It was a headline that drew the attention of the whole country. Who were these men, and why did they go there? Why the lead masks? And what signal were they waiting for? The answers never came. But what investigators did find, in their notebooks, in their workshop, and in their past, would only deepen the strangeness of their story. Manuel and Miguel were not strangers to the world of strange experiments. They worked as electronics technicians. Their days were spent repairing radios, testing valves, and soldering wire in small shops around their town. At night, they read about energy, magnetism, and unseen forces. Friends later told police that both men were fascinated by spiritualist ideas. They believed that technology could make contact with something beyond ordinary life. In the months before their deaths, the two began meeting with a small circle of like-minded friends. They spoke about building devices that might amplify mind or spirit. They collected coils, condensers, and batteries. Neighbors heard the hum of equipment late into the evening. One friend said they called these sessions scientific tests, a phrase that sounded serious but hid a deep curiosity about the unknown. Investigators traced the final days step by step. On August 17th, the men told family they were going to the city to buy parts. They took more cash than usual. They also brought a set of tools and a notebook. Instead of visiting suppliers, they purchased 2 new suits. They bought waterproof coats. They obtained a sheet of lead and cut it into crude eye masks with a small saw. The rough edges were still visible. Each mask was shaped to fit snugly over the eyes and bridge of the nose. There were no holes to see through. On August 20th, they took a bus toward Niterói. Along the way, they stopped at a bar on the road to the hills. Receipts and witness statements confirm this. The waitress remembered 2 quiet men in formal clothing who asked for a bottle of water and sandwiches. She said they looked tense but polite. When asked if they needed cups, one replied that it was not necessary. The empty bottle was later found beside their bodies. The notebook beside them on the hill contained a short list written in Portuguese. It mentioned arriving at a place at 1630. It told them to ingest capsules at 1830. It advised after effect protect metals and await signal mask. The phrasing was unusual, but clear enough to suggest a plan. Protect metals likely referred to watches and measuring devices. The lead masks may have been intended to shield the eyes from a bright flash or radiation during a test. Back in their workshop, police found other notes. Some described previous attempts to receive signals using homemade gear. There were sketches of circuits and references to times of day when contact was more likely. Friends told officers that weeks earlier a similar experiment had ended abruptly when a flash of light frightened the group. After that, Manuel and Miguel became more secretive. They spoke of trying again in a place high and clean, away from city noise. The hill above Rio fit that idea. Forensic work in 1966 Brazil had limits. Toxicology depended on preserving organs quickly. By the time autopsies were performed, the bodies had been exposed to heat and rain. Samples had degraded. Reports list no detectable poison, but the methods were not sensitive by modern standards. If the man had swallowed a substance that broke down quickly, it might have left no trace. The pathologist wrote cause undetermined. The lack of struggle at the scene is striking. Both men lay on their backs, hands by their sides, as if they had simply decided to rest. Their pockets still held cash. Their watches and rings were present. No sign of robbery. No footprints suggesting a third person remained near them. The grass around their bodies was pressed down only where they had fallen. Why the formal suits? Some who knew them said they dressed that way for important tests, a ritual to mark the seriousness of the attempt. It may also have been their way of showing respect to whatever signal they hoped to receive. The towels found in the packet could suggest they expected sweat, heat, or some physical reaction. The water bottle points to planned ingestion at a fixed time. Everything fits a methodical schedule, not a random act. Police considered several scenarios. One is that the men took capsules they believed would help them see or hear signals. Perhaps the dose was wrong. Perhaps the capsules contained an unknown drug sold to them by someone who disappeared after the event. Another scenario is that they ingested nothing at all and died of natural causes triggered by stress and heat. But two healthy men dying at the same time, in the same position, strange belief. The hill offered no answers. There were no burn marks on the ground, no melted metal, no dami boyetashchen, nothing that would confirm a blast, a beam, or device. Only the damaged lockbox at the cliff rail, likely ripped away by storms earlier that season. In their town, grief mixed with confusion. Families could not accept that two careful, intelligent technicians had walked into death by chance. Their friends kept referring to one phrase from the notebook, a wait signal. To them, this was the key. Manuel and Miguel went to the hill expecting a message. They prepared their bodies, their tools, and their eyes. The signal never came, or if it did, it left no mark the living could read. The deeper the police looked, the stranger the pattern became. Each detail made sense on its own. Together, they refused to form a simple story. That is how the case began to move from the hands of detectives into the hands of history. A plan was made, a ritual was followed, and then nothing but silence. Police returned to the hill for weeks after the discovery. They mapped every object, photographed every angle, and questioned anyone who might have seen the two men. The grass had already begun to grow over the place where the bodies had lain. Rain washed away many of the lighter traces. Still, investigators noted the calmness of the scene. It was as though both men had lain down knowing what would happen next. Detectives followed the path the men had taken through the city. Witnesses confirmed they arrived by bus and carried a small bag. They were seen near a bar, a pharmacy, and a shop that sold lead sheets. One clerk said they asked about how to cut the material safely. Another remembered them buying insulated wire. No one reported fear or agitation. They behaved like customers preparing a project. The bar receipts gave police their time frame. From the station, the climb to the top of Morro do Vintum took less than an hour. The note in their pocket matched this timing exactly. Arrive at 4:30, take capsules at 6:30. That kind of precision suggested a schedule rather than panic. When forensic teams examined the objects, they found nothing explosive or electronic. The masks were hand-cut and rough. The watches had stopped at different times, likely from moisture. The water bottle was clean. The towels were dry. The notebook contained no pages torn out. At the morgue, the autopsy results remained vague. The men had died around the same time, possibly between 6 and 8 hours after arriving. No wounds, no gunpowder, no poison in the stomach or lungs. The pathologist wrote cardiac arrest caused by unknown agent. Investigators expanded their search to the men's town of Campos dos Goitacazes. Inside their workshop, police found soldering tools, coils of wire, glass tubes, and diagrams of electronic circuits. There were also several copies of a book on spirit communication. Notes in the margins referred to intense luminosity and protect vision. That phrase echoed the function of elite masks. Friends described late-night experiments. They spoke about energy fields, about building a spiritual device. One friend, LCO, said he had taken part in an earlier test month before. The goal, he said, was to detect signals from another plane of existence, what they called higher intelligences. That earlier experiment ended abruptly when they were frightened by a flash of light above a nearby field. No one else had seen it. Police questioned LCO for days. He insisted the men were alive when he last saw them. He said they planned another test soon and had asked him to join. He refused. When he heard their deaths, he believed they had finally made contact. Other locals offered stranger accounts. Some claimed to have seen glowing orbs over the hill that night, like silent lights drifting through the sky. Such reports are common after tragedies, but they entered the case file nonetheless. Investigators also looked into the possibility of fraud or blackmail. If someone had sold the men fake capsules of contact, it could explain the deaths. But no such seller was ever found. No third-party fingerprints appeared on the objects. The final report concluded that the men might have taken something, a sedative, a hallucinogen, perhaps both, that caused heart failure. But there was no proof. The samples from their organs had already decomposed by the time laboratory testing began. Public reaction was immediate. Newspapers printed photos of the masks and called them shields for the afterlife. Spiritualist groups claimed the men were attempting astral projection. Others said they were victims of a dangerous cult. The police denied all such claims, but offered nothing to replace them. When the official file closed, it was only a list of dates, names, and unanswered questions. It named no suspect, no cause, and no motive. The press lost interest. The families buried the men quietly. Years later, journalists reopened the story. They found the same dead ends. No toxic records, no missing person connected to the sale of capsules, no physical evidence of radiation. Only the masks remained. 2 crude pieces of lead shaped by hand, stored in a police archive, cold and silent. The hill above Rio returned to normal. The grass grew back. The trail vanished. But each time locals looked toward the ridge of dusk, they remembered the men who went there to await a signal and never came back. The strangest part of the lead mask's mystery is the time between the last sighting of the men and the discovery of their bodies. It was more than 3 days. No one saw them come down from the hill. No one heard a struggle, and no one reported anything unusual. They had arrived on the 20th. Their estimated time of death placed them near sunset that same day. Yet their absence was not noticed until the 23rd, when the boys stumbled across them. Investigators tried to fill those missing hours with reason. They examined every road, trail, and local path. The police checked the hotels and goose houses in Niterói to see if the men had stayed the night before. They found one entry that matched their description. They had checked in briefly, stayed only a few hours, and left before dawn. The room contained nothing but a few cigarette butts and a newspaper. The bus conductor remembered them too. He said they were polite but quiet, carrying a small bag and a parcel wrapped in brown paper. They looked like men with a purpose. Another passenger recalled that one of them stared out of the window most of the ride, whispering numbers to himself. The weather that day was hot and humid. The climb to the top of Morro do Ventum would have been exhausting, especially in heavy suits. Yet the men appear to have made it easily. The path to the summit was steep but manageable. From the top, the view stretched across the bay toward the city, wide, bright, and silent. Investigators believe the men waited for sunset intentionally. The note in the pocket confirmed the timing. 16:30 at the specified place. 18:30 ingest capsules. The capsule reference became the center of the inquiry. What were these capsules? Why take them at a fixed hour? A local pharmacist told police that two men had come in days earlier asking about strong sedatives. He refused to sell any without a prescription. He could not confirm they were the same men, but the timing matched. Another witness, a bar owner near the bus stop, claimed that one of them had mentioned seeing a great light. The phrase was vague, but it fit the pattern of their previous experiments. When the police reconstructed the timeline, the gaps became more unsettling. From 6:30 onward, no one could say what happened. There were no signs of struggle, no attempt to flee, no movement downhill. The men seemed to have stayed where they were until death. The only damage at the site was the bent railing near the edge of the cliff and the missing box that once contained tools and wires. Forensic teams examined the vegetation around the bodies. They found no burn marks, no melted material, no chemical residue. Soil tests came back clean. The theory of an explosion or flash faded quickly. By all measures, the men should have been found sitting peacefully in an empty field. But the atmosphere described by the first police officer was heavy, almost staged. He wrote in his report, "They lay as though placed with care." In the weeks that followed, new rumors appeared. Some said the men had joined a secret scientific cult. Others claimed they had been tricked by a con artist who promised communication with other worlds. Spiritualist newspapers printed stories of energy experiments gone wrong. None could be proved. The families were left with silence. Manol's sister said he had been nervous before the trip. He told her that what they were about to do was dangerous but necessary. Miguel's relatives recalled a similar one. Both men believed something extraordinary was going to happen, an event that would change everything. Those words echoed through every interview the police conducted. Change everything. If the experiment was meant to reach beyond this world, it succeeded in a way neither could have imagined. Their names became legend. The hill became a landmark for curiosity seekers, and the hours between 4:30 and their final breath remained a void, a window of time no one could fill. Whatever happened in those missing hours, it left no mark except two bodies, two masks, and a question that still waits for an answer. The lead masks were the most striking element of the case. Crude, heavy, and hand-cut, they looked more like fragments of industrial scrap than anything designed for humans. Each was roughly shaped to fit the upper part of the face, covering the eyes and part of the nose. They had no straps, no hinges, no padding. Whoever made them had simply bent the thin sheets to the desired shape and trimmed the edges with tin snips. Experts studied them closely. The thickness was about 1 millimeter, the weight around half a kilogram each. They were made from common lead, the kind used in electrical work and chemical laboratories. Nothing about them suggested professional manufacture. They were improvised, made quickly and cheaply. The purpose of such masks became the heart of the investigation. At first, police thought of radiation. The 1960s were full of stories about atomic energy and invisible dangers. The word protect in the note found on the body supported that idea. The phrase protect metals could have referred to watches and measuring devices. But no radioactive material was found on the hill. No unusual readings appeared on the Geiger counter used by technicians from Rio's naval base. A more spiritual interpretation soon followed. Friends of the men said the masks were not meant to block radiation, but light. A light so strong that it could blind the human eye. In the language of their circle, the signal was not a radio wave, but a divine manifestation. They expected to witness something luminous, something sacred. In earlier experiments, they had spoken of flashes of energy that left them dizzy and disoriented. The masks, then, were a kind of ritual protection, not scientific equipment. They were preparing for revelation, not danger. Investigators also explored a psychological angle. If the men had taken hallucinogenic substances or hypnotic drugs, the masks could represent control, a way to limit visual overload during a trance. But again, there was no trace of drugs, and their behavior before the trip showed no signs of confusion or intoxication. One detail made the masks even stranger. Each was shaped slightly differently by hand. The edges bore fingerprints of solder and residue from candle wax, as though the men had worked on them in a hurry. Police located a local craftsman who confirmed that they had bought lead sheets from him days earlier. He said they asked how to cut and bend the metal without special tools. When he offered to do it for them, they refused, saying they needed to make them themselves. The workshop back home revealed small strips of lead on the floor, confirming that at least part of the work had been done there. They had practiced before making the final pair. To the investigators, this detail mattered. The masks were not random objects found by chance. They were deliberate creations, part of a plan. Every mark of the shears, every bend, was a choice. When shown photographs of the scene, colleagues from their technical circle were silent. One finally said they thought they were scientists, but they were seekers. It was a phrase that stayed in the report. The press turned the masks into symbols. Newspapers published sketches of them, often exaggerated, making them look like medieval armor or alien helmets. Readers were fascinated. The idea of two men dying on a hill under the gaze of unseen forces captured public imagination. For the families, the masks were unbearable proof that the men had truly expected something. They had prepared themselves carefully, chosen their clothes, carried their equipment, and waited. If they had been fooled, it was not by another person, but by belief itself. The masks were stored in a police evidence room for years. Dust settled on them. They were never claimed. Today, they remain one of the few physical relics of the case. Dull gray, cold to the touch, and silent. In their weight lies the whole story. Two men who built protection for an event that never came. When the case refused to close, investigators began to explore every theory that might explain what killed the two men on the hill. None could be proved, but each revealed something about the world in which they lived, a time when science and superstition often walked together. The simplest theory was poison. The note in their pocket mentioned capsules, and the empty water bottle supported the idea that they swallowed something. The autopsy, however, showed no trace of chemicals. Toxicology was primitive in 1966 Brazil. Heat, rain, and time had damaged the organs, so a fragile compound might have disappeared before analysis. Still, without proof, poison remained only a theory. A second idea was radiation. The masks, the mention of protection, and their work with electronics all pointed that way. But technicians from the Navy tested the site and the bodies. Their meters showed nothing unusual. Even the men's clothing carried no sign of contamination. The third explanation focused on natural causes. Perhaps both suffered heart failure triggered by stress, dehydration, or heat. But they were young and healthy. For two men to die simultaneously of natural causes in identical positions was unlikely. There was no sign of struggle, no collapse mid-step. They had lain down carefully side by side and folded their hands. Investigators considered the possibility of electrical shock. Both men worked with circuits. If they had built a device and tested it on the hill, perhaps a hidden battery or coil caused fatal current through their bodies. Yet there was no equipment found near them, no burn marks on the skin, no wiring in the soil. The ground showed nothing but grass and stones. When local reporters could not find answers, they turned to the spiritual community. The story spread through newspapers and radio as a mystery of contact. Spiritualist groups said the men had attempted communication with higher beings. Some claimed they were trying to reach Mars. Others said they sought invisible energy through meditation and vibration. The masks, in this view, were not protection but initiation. Police interviewed several members of their circle. One spoke of astral vision, another of energy transfer. The investigators dismissed such terms as fantasy, but they recorded them all. The transcripts show that the men's belief in unseen forces was sincere. They were not frauds or thrill seekers. They genuinely believed they were standing on the edge of discovery. A more practical theory suggested crime. Perhaps someone had tricked them into buying dangerous pills. If so, the person vanished without trace. No new fingerprints, no extra footprints, no witness to another figure on the hill. The cash in their pockets remained untouched. In later years, amateur researchers developed new ideas. One proposed that the capsules contained LSD, sold to them as a way to enhance spiritual sensitivity. That would explain their calmness and their precise preparation. Under hallucinogens, they could have experienced visions or paralysis before death. Another idea pointed to carbon monoxide from a hidden generator. But there was no engine, no fuel smell, and no residue. Even the simplest physical facts resisted agreement. The pathologist estimated death at least 12 hours before discovery, maybe more. But a farmer nearby said he saw lights on the hill after midnight. Some thought they were flashlights. Others said they were too bright and steady, like orbs. The police report recorded the statement, but offered no comment. When the official investigation closed, the death certificates read unknown cause. That phrase became as famous as the masks themselves. Over the decades, journalists returned to the case, each trying to fill the gaps with new science or old fear. None succeeded. The truth stayed hidden, wrapped in the fog of that August night. Whatever killed them left no trace. Only the perfect stillness of two bodies lying side by side on the grass. Their eyes covered, their watches stopped, their mission unfinished. When the story reached the newspapers, Brazil was captivated. The front pages carried photographs of the two men in their suits, the crude masks beside them, and headlines that promised revelation but offered only confusion. Reporters filled the blanks with speculation. Some called them scientists lost to radiation experiments. Others spoke of UFOs, of secret societies, of contact with other worlds. The police tried to control the narrative. Officially, the case was closed as death by unknown cause. But that phrase only fed curiosity. Radio hosts debated every detail, from the wording of the note to the direction of the wind that night. Letters poured in from listeners claiming to have seen lights above the hill. A few insisted they could interpret the message found in the notebook. One newspaper printed the phrase "protect metals" beside a drawing of a flying disc. Another printed an image of the masks and called them windows for the dead. The story grew until it escaped the control of facts. In Rio, taxi drivers discussed it as a warning against playing with forces beyond comprehension. University students saw it as a tragedy born from obsession. For spiritualist circles, it was proof that the soul could reach out through technology. The families faced the worst of the attention. Strangers appeared at their doors asking for interviews or relics. Rumors began to twist the memory of the men. Some said they belonged to a cult. Others whispered that they were spies testing new weapons. None of it was true, but the noise was too loud to silence. In their hometown, the funerals drew hundreds. The small cemetery filled with onlookers and journalists. Cameras flashed as the coffins were lowered. No priest could explain what had happened. One local spiritual leader said quietly that they had gone in search of light and found darkness. After the burial, the police kept the evidence locked away. The masks, the notebooks, the watches, and the pieces of lead. The case file grew thin with time. Interest moved elsewhere, but the story did not die. It became legend. Over the next years, documentaries revisited the mystery. Each time, the tone shifted with the era. In the 1970s, it was described as an encounter with extraterrestrials. In the 1980s, as a cautionary tale of faith and technology. In the 1990s, it reappeared as a symbol of Cold War paranoia. Locals kept their own version. Children were warned not to climb the hill at night. Some said the air there still felt heavy, as if charged by something unseen. Others said the masks could still be heard clinking faintly when the wind passed through the grass. For those who lived near Morro do Vento, the story became part of the landscape. The mystery outlasted its facts. Scholars later examined the coverage and called it an example of how myth forms from confusion. A few words in a notebook, 2 bodies, and a lack of closure. That was all it took. The absence of explanation became the explanation itself. In the end, the public made the case their own. Every decade found a new version of truth to fit its fears and fascinations. But in the official records, nothing changed. The cause remained blank, the masks remained in storage, and the hill remained silent. The men had wanted a signal. Instead, they became one. Months after the case was closed, small details continued to emerge. Each clue seemed minor, but together they deepened the fog around what happened on that hill. One clue came from a notebook found beside the bodies. Beyond the famous note about the capsules and the masks, other pages contained sequences of numbers, sketches of coils, and fragments of calculations. Some matched electrical formulas. Others were nonsense. Investigators wondered if the men were encoding something or simply writing down frequencies from experiment. A friend of theirs later confirmed that they had been trying to build a device capable of detecting magnetic waves of thought. It was based on vague principles borrowed from both physics and spiritualism. The men believed that the mind could send or receive signals, like a radio tuned to a different band. They wanted to prove it scientifically. Another clue was a set of burn matches found near the scene. Someone had lit them in a circle, perhaps to mark a point or measure time. The police dismissed it as coincidence, but the placement was precise. A third clue came from a tailor who recognized the suits worn by the men. They had been ordered just days before. The tailor remembered their instructions clearly. The suits were to be formal, identical, and ready within 24 hours. They insisted on quality fabric and paid in cash. When asked why they needed them so urgently, one of them said, "It's for something important." Then there was the question of the towels. 2 small white towels were found folded neatly inside a plastic bag. They were clean and unused. Investigators guessed they were for wiping sweat, but some researchers later thought they might have been symbolic, part of a ritual to purify themselves before the experiment. A final strange clue surfaced years later. In the archive of a small newspaper from Niterói, a forgotten report was discovered. It described a fisherman who claimed to have seen a blue light above the hill on the night of the deaths. He said it hovered silently for several minutes, then faded. No other witnesses could confirm it, but his statement matched similar reports from other parts of Brazil in the same year. Accounts of glowing spheres moving over the sea. Despite all these fragments, the story remained unresolved. There was no central piece to hold them together. The men's bank accounts showed no debt, no sudden spending, no sign of pressure. Their workshop was ordinary. Their families insisted they were rational, if slightly obsessed. Some investigators began to see the case not as a mystery of crime, but as a portrait of human faith in science and salvation. The men had mixed logic with belief until they could no longer tell one from the other. One journalist who visited the site a decade later wrote, "They died waiting for proof that never arrived." But their conviction was absolute. Even today, visitors to Morro do Ventum sometimes find small offerings, candles, coins, handwritten notes, left near the place where the bodies were found. No one knows who leaves them. Some believe they're tokens of respect. Others say they're messages sent upward, in case the signal still waits to be answered. What remains are the details: 2 lead masks, a notebook, a bottle, and the silence of a hill. Every clue that points one way turns back into mystery. Every attempt to explain the event collapses into coincidence. The more we learn, the less it fits together. That paradox, the feeling of standing inches from understanding and still not knowing, is what keeps the lead mask case alive. 2 men sought connection with something beyond the world. Instead, they became the signal themselves. As decades passed, the lead mask case refused to fade. It reappeared in magazines, on television, and later across the internet. Every new generation of researchers tried to reopen it, hoping that modern science could reveal what 1960s forensics could not. In the 1990s, a journalist from Rio obtained access to the original police files. Many pages were faded, handwritten in pencil, with missing photographs and incomplete reports. The evidence list confirmed what was already known: 2 suits, 2 masks, a bottle, towels, and a notebook. But a few details had never been printed. One of them was a note that read, "Exposure estimated to be 10 hours." Another was a brief line mentioning that the soil near the bodies contained slightly elevated levels of lead. Whether this came from the masks or something else was never determined. By the 2000s, forensic science had changed. Researchers proposed exhuming the bodies for new analysis, but the families refused. They believed the men should rest undisturbed. Without samples, new toxicology tests were impossible. In 2011, a television documentary attempted to recreate the event. Using local actors and historians, they followed the route from Campos dos Goitacazes to Niterói. They even visited the bar where the 2 men bought water. The waitress who served them was long gone, but her daughter remembered her mother's story. They were polite, she said, and they looked as if they were waiting for something. The program concluded that the men might have taken psychedelic substances, perhaps LSD or mescaline, under the belief that the experience would help them make contact with a higher plane. This theory matched what their friend LCO had described years earlier. It also explained the masks and the calm posture of the bodies. Hallucinogens can slow heart rate and cause paralysis when taken in high doses, but no physical evidence remains to confirm it. Other modern analysts turn to psychology. They describe the case as a form of shared delusion, a folie à deux. 2 men reinforcing each other's belief until it reached the point of fatal certainty. Under this theory, they truly believed they would survive whatever happened on the hill. The ritual clothing, the masks, and the note all became symbols of commitment to their vision. Technology also inspired new speculation. Online forums linked the case to UFO sightings in South America during the same period. In 1966, both Brazil and Argentina recorded waves of reports describing bright metallic discs. The connection is circumstantial, but the dates align. In 2018, a Brazilian historian tracked down an unpublished police memo. It contained a single handwritten line, a small burn mark observed on upper grass near bodies, now erased by rain. No fotografia existe. The remark was left unexplained. Even now, researchers visit the site with drones and metal detectors. They find fragments of old iron, bottle caps, and coins, but nothing related to the original event. The exact spot where the men lay is overgrown, and the soil has shifted after decades of erosion. The lead masks, preserved in storage, remain the only authentic relic. They are kept at a local museum archive, dull with oxidation, heavier than they appear. The case continues to draw believers and skeptics alike. Some say it proves the danger of curiosity without caution. Others say it shows the thin line between faith and madness. To most, it remains a story of two men who dreamed of a message from beyond and died waiting for it. The modern world has satellites, sensors, and algorithms that can map the invisible. Yet none of them can decode the last thoughts of two technicians lying on a hill under the Brazilian sun, their eyes shielded from a light that never came. More than half a century has passed since the discovery on Morro do Vento. The case has become legend, retold in countless forms: radio dramas, documentaries, podcasts, and books. Each retelling changes the tone, but never the essence. Two men went to a hill to meet the unknown, and no one ever understood what they found. For historians, the story stands as a reflection of its time. The 1960s were an age of contradiction: nuclear fear and spiritual awakening, technological confidence and fascination with the invisible. Manuel and Miguel lived in that space between science and mysticism. They trusted circuits and frequencies, yet sought something beyond reason. Sociologists see their deaths as part of a wider cultural wave. Across Brazil, spiritualism and technology had begun to merge. Radio was no longer just a medium of sound. It became a metaphor for connection with unseen worlds. Seances were described as tuning the soul. Mediums spoke of cosmic vibration. The two technicians, armed with tools and imagination, pushed that metaphor into the physical world. Writers later compared their fate to alchemists of the past, men who believed that through secret knowledge they could cross boundaries forbidden to ordinary minds. Their hill became a modern version of those ancient laboratories. For the public, the image of the lead masks never lost its power. They became symbols of human curiosity turned inward. Two faceless silhouettes lying side by side on a hill, hands still, eyes covered. The scene is both peaceful and terrifying, a portrait of faith pushed to its final silence. In Brazil, the story remains part of national folklore. Locals still visit the site, leaving offerings or standing quietly where the grass grows over the old stones. Some bring radios, tuning through static as if hoping to catch an echo of that long-lost signal. Others come simply to feel the place, to stand where mystery once breathed. The police files rest in archives now, yellowed and incomplete. A few photographs survive, grainy black and white, the masks dull against the sunlight. Scholars sometimes request access to them, and each time the answer is the same: no further investigation plan. The cause of death, still unknown. Modern storytellers have turned the case into a metaphor. It speaks of obsession, of belief, of the need to touch something larger than ourselves. In a world that measures everything, the unsolved still holds a strange kind of purity. The hill above Rio remains quiet. Grass and wind have erased all signs of that August day. Yet the legend endures, whispering that not all mysteries exist to be solved. Some exist to remind us of the limits of knowing. The story of the lead masks is not just about death. It is about the courage or madness of seeking answers in the dark. Two men believed that the universe would speak to them if they listened hard enough. Whether it did or not, we will never know. They went in search of light. All that remains is silence.